The cybersecurity landscape is full of single solution providers, making it easy for unexpected cyber threats to sneak through the cracks. That's why Fortra is creating a stronger, simpler strategy for protection, one that increases your security maturity while decreasing the operational burden that comes with it. This is all possible thanks to Fortra's best-in-class portfolio and deep bench of expert problem solvers. Fortra's integrated, scalable solutions help customers face their toughest challenges with confidence. Learn more at securityweekly.com/Fortra, Fortra. If your organization is ready to embrace edge computing, we have good news. The 2023 AT&T Cybersecurity Insights report provides everything you need to know to get started. In the report, we identify the common characteristics of edge computing. We found edge use cases are rapidly coming online, and we reveal how to secure edge computing. Most importantly, you'll learn how to prepare for your edge ecosystem. Get your complimentary copy of the report today. Visit securityweekly.com/ATT Cybersecurity. That's securityweekly.com/ATT Cybersecurity.
Hi everyone, Jeff Mann here, co-host of Paul's Security Weekly, and we are at Black Hat 2023. I'm here this morning with Theresa Lanowitz. She's head of Cybersecurity Evangelism for AT&T. Theresa, good morning.
Hi, Jeff. It is great to be here with you at Black Hat 2023 in Las Vegas, where it is, I think we just checked, it's about 9 o'clock in the morning, 90 degrees maybe?
90 degrees.
Yeah.
I almost put on a parka to walk over here today. It's so chilly. It's actually going to be highs of like 101, 102 today, which isn't bad for Las Vegas, but definitely hot summer weather. Hey, we talked at RSA a few months ago, and we talked about the Edge Insights report that AT&T put out, but you have something new to talk about.
Yeah, so it's great to see you. Last time we talked was at RSA back in April, and when we saw each other last time, we had just launched, from the AT&T cybersecurity side, we had just launched our AT&T Cybersecurity Insights report, Edge Ecosystem.
Right.
And that was at RSA. So here we are now, in August at Black Hat, and what we have out right now is our AT&T Cybersecurity Insights report, focus on healthcare. So the report we launched in April is really our core report. That has all the tons and tons of data. It's a 52-page long report. What we do over the course of the year is we create these vertical reports, which are really a double click on a lot of the information that we have in that core report. And we pull out some more information from the data that we've gathered on these specific verticals. So right now, today, we have the healthcare report. We're also coming out with one for U.S. SLED, state, local, and higher education.
Okay.
Later in the year, we'll have one on transportation, and later in the year, we'll have one on manufacturing as well.
Great. Hey, before we get too far into the conversation, either refresh for our audience their memories, or if they're listening for the first time, could you briefly tell us about this thing that you guys call the Edge?
Yeah, so our Insights report really focuses on the Edge. And so just to set some context for our AT&T Cybersecurity Insights report, it's a vendor-neutral, forward-looking report. And for 2023, we went out and we surveyed 1,418 professionals from around the world in areas such as application development, security, operations, networking, and line of business. And we surveyed those people in North America, Latin America, EMEA, and APAC. So it's totally a global survey. And what we wanted to find out was, what does their Edge ecosystem look like? And to answer your question, what do we mean by edge? If you think of the word edge, we hear that word used quite a bit. And it's really sort of context sensitive. And if you ask 10 different people what the word edge means, you'll probably get 12 different answers.
Right.
And so for the purposes of this report, the purposes of our research, and the purposes of this discussion, we define edge computing as really being it's software defined. And that can be on-prem or in the cloud.
Right.
It's also about having the applications, the workload, the hosting closer to where that data is being generated and consumed, because the edge is all about data.
Right.
And then the third thing is it's a distributed model of management, intelligence, and networks. So if we think in the context of healthcare, think about any device in a hospital, in a doctor's office, it's internet connected, and you're getting information back from that. So that information has to be protected, it has to be usable, and it has to be trusted for that healthcare provider who's getting that information back.
Right. It's interesting that terminology is something in our business, our industry, that I like to focus on. I get a little bit grumpy about because I'm a curmudgeon. Those of us those that watch the show know that. And I am always, I want to use the right word, not annoyed, but passionate about the meaning of words and trying to get it in context. And like edge, so many other terms in our business, there is no one universal 100% agreed upon meaning. When I think of edge, I think back to, I came from a DoD background, and when this thing that we now call cyber was first starting, we called it internet security. We believed, corporations, organizations have networks, and they need to protect it with the perimeter, and there's an inside and an outside. Think a castle and a moat, and that's really blown up. That doesn't really exist anymore.
Right.
And so the edge is all the things, and I'm sure there's other competing terms out there that sort of describe more or less the same thing, depending on who the conversation is and what they're trying to help people in terms of solutions and tools. So that's to me what I'm hearing from edge. The fact that the data is out there, and who logs onto a network anymore? Everything's on their phone, on their laptop,
right.
and so on and so forth.
And it's too slow to backhaul everything back to a central data center. And you talked about the perimeter or the castle and moat. That we know that sort of way, that network architecture is really no longer effective for what we're doing. And if you think about edge computing, the thing with edge computing is everything is changing. The network's changing. We're looking for networks that are lower latency, higher bandwidth. The applications, if you will, are changing. They're no longer these GUI-based applications where you have to be tethered to your laptop or desktop. And it's not even about opening up a web app or a mobile app on your smartphone, for example, and typing something in. It's about near real-time digital first experience for that consumer.
Right.
And so everything is changing. So the applications, applets, if you will, they're ephemeral. They come together on an as-needed basis, deliver what you need. So we're moving away even from an application development perspective from these very, very GUI-based applications where we've been for, a couple of decades.
Right, like the whole internet history.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about the healthcare focus of your edge reporting and your surveys and what you've discovered. What did you find in your analysis that was the same with everybody else, but also what's unique and different in terms of the challenges and what healthcare, we all sort of intuitively understand that's a really big deal. We got to keep people alive.
Right.
But what did your analysis and your research uncover?
I think the really great thing about our healthcare information that we have is that it's showing that the field of healthcare is at a point of incredible innovation, brought to you courtesy of edge computing. And one of the things that we found that was similar with healthcare as well as the core report when we look at the aggregate, the total numbers, is that there is this balanced type of investment, consistency investment. So if we ask people where they were spending their edge budgets, and in the core report, people told us that 22% of their overall edge budget they were spending on security. 22% of their overall edge budget they were spending on applications. So that idea of everything is changing. 23% of their overall edge budget they were spending on planning, which is something that we have probably not really heard much of in the past. And then 30% of them said, we're spending that 30% of the overall edge budget is really spent on network. And if you look at healthcare, those numbers are very similar. But what we found with healthcare is there are 5 top use cases that the healthcare people who participated in this survey told us. And so our N for healthcare was 205. Our N for the core report was 1,418.
Gotcha.
So in healthcare, the top 5 use cases, the top use case that everybody identified in healthcare was teleemergency medical services, and then consumer virtual care, immersive medical training, robots and drones, which is really interesting, and then hospital at home. And if you take those last 2, robots and drones and hospital at home, they were spending a little bit more on the networking side, about 35% on the networking side, and they were spending a little bit more on the security side, about 23% of the budget on the security side. But there was still really that idea of we're spending on security, on applications, on the network, and on planning. And the drones and the robots, those are the really interesting things, because what we found out in this research with the healthcare portion of it is that endpoints are definitely changing. they're maturing. And 53% of healthcare professionals right now, they told us that the most common endpoints that they're using are mobile endpoints. But then they said, if we look 3 years out into the future, 5 years out into the future, we're looking at things such as drones and robots. We're looking at things such as wearables for remote patient monitoring. And we're already seeing drones and robots in use. So robots, very efficiently, delivering supplies to a nurse's station, disinfecting a room when a patient leaves, or disinfecting an exam room. The other thing that robots are really being used for, which is really a really interesting use case, we've all been in hospitals and we're looking for a specific area, and they tell you, follow the red line to the orange line to the purple line, and it's just this.
And you end up in the morgue.
And you end up somewhere where you don't want to be.
Right.
And so what some hospitals are using the robots for is directions. Have a robot right there in the hospital, and if you get lost, that robot can help you. Or maybe even that robot can actually take you by the hand and take you to where you're going.
Interesting. Out of curiosity, a lot of the buzz around healthcare, especially on our show, and we do news segments every week. A lot of talk about vulnerabilities in medical devices, implants, pacemakers, and things like that. Did that show up in your research at all, or where did it fall in the pecking order?
Yeah, that definitely showed up. And if you look at these endpoints, because every device that's attached, that's an endpoint, right? So every device that's attached, you go into your doctor's office, you're paying your copay, that's an endpoint handled by PCI. Payment card industry, right? And then you go into the exam room, and there might be something to monitor your vitals. That's an endpoint. You're in a surgical situation. Maybe the surgeon's using some type of surgical instrument that is connected to the endpoint. Those are all endpoints that really need to be protected and taken care of.
Right.
And what we found from our research, and this is in the healthcare area, the number one concern of a perceived attack, we said to people, what do you think the biggest attack would potentially be on healthcare? And the number one perceived attack in healthcare was DDoS. And that correlated with the broader set of data as well. The number one attack was DDoS. And you look at those types of things and you kind of think, well, everything old is new again. DDoS is making a comeback. But if you think about all those endpoints, taking down those endpoints for, even if it's 5 minutes, 10 minutes, is really, really critical. And if you look at our top use case for healthcare, was teleemergency medical services. And the top attack concern for teleemergency medical services was insider threat. So in healthcare, that insider threat really kind of rises to the top as well.
Interesting. Yeah, so much of our industry that we call cybersecurity, based on principles from, centuries ago, defense principles and things like that, and data security, where I cut my teeth in the early days working for the DoD, was all about confidentiality, integrity, and availability. Probably 90% of this industry for the last 25, 30 years is focused on confidentiality. So the idea that availability now, I was having this conversation yesterday with someone where it's not simply protecting the patient data. The doctors don't care, the nurses don't care, the patients doesn't care. They want to keep them alive. So they need to have the data, they need to have the information, they need to have the medication dispensed and all that. That's got to be there. It's the same problem, but a very different problem, all at the same time.
Yeah, and I think you're right. So as you said, about 90% of what we've done in the past couple of decades has really been focused on that idea of confidentiality. Let's make sure that we're keeping that data safe. And now we get to this idea of edge, where that is a digital first experience. The healthcare provider, a doctor, a nurse, they're looking at that information coming in on some type of vital monitor, on some sort of remote patient monitoring. So that data has to be trusted. Has somebody gotten into that data and done something untoward with it? And it also has to be usable. How can I use this data to make sure I'm delivering a better outcome for the person that I'm receiving it from?
Interesting. So, we're winding down now on our time. I wanted to ask, does the reporting that you do and the information that you provide, are you giving summaries and recommendations, or are you mostly just putting it out there and hoping that the readers will pick up on where you're going with it?
Yeah, as I mentioned, it's really actionable. So we give a lot of recommendations in there. And what I always tell people is take this report, take our core report, go back to your own organization and use it as a spark for a conversation within your organization. what we found is DDoS is a top attack concern.
Right.
We're seeing a lot of ransomware in healthcare organizations right now. That doesn't mean you can take your eye off of those things, but use this report as a starting point for the conversation. Take a look at some of the recommendations we make in it and go and implement some of these things in your organization. I don't think anybody can say, oh, we have too much security in our lives.
Yeah, not really. Sort of my last question is, given that this is based on a survey, you came up with what bubbled up to the top is what organizations, healthcare companies are doing. In your opinion, is it right? Is it the right focus areas, or is there something missing?
I'm not a medical professional, so
seems to be okay.
So the 205 medical professionals, healthcare professionals who took this survey, this is the data that they have given to us. So, and this is what we're reporting on.
All right, so best practice, consensus type of thing,
yeah.
Probably the right thing to do. Great. Well, thank you for your time. It was a pleasure to talk to you. Please look for securityweekly.com/ATT Cybersecurity BH for more information. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello and welcome. I'm Sean Metcalf, and this is Security Weekly. Today and this morning, we are joined by Mickey Bresman, CEO of Sempris. And I'm very happy to have you here and be able to talk with you, Mickey. We've certainly known each other for years and have talked about the great success that you've had with Sempris. And one of the things that we've talked about in the past was Sempris and your focus on really helping to move organizations forward and solve the problems that a lot of organizations tend to have. I have a few questions for you, and I think I'd like to start with why do or should organizations modernize their Active Directory environment, and really what does that mean from your perspective?
Thank you. Thanks, Sean. Great to see you as always, and great to be here. Thank you all for joining. It's a great question. I think if you think about the history, and I know that you know it probably better than anybody else, but AD has been around, roughly speaking, from 1999, which makes it about 24 years old technology at this stage. And it also means that the system has been in place for about 24 years. Multiple different people used to be administrating that system, making changes, setting up policies, rules, and so on, coming and going from the organization. The organization itself changed. If you think about the time where AD actually came out, virtualization wasn't even a thing yet. Cloud was not a thing yet. Working remotely was kind of, but not really a thing yet, right? All of the things that we today take completely for granted. So if you think about all of that, that means there is some technical debt that was gathered over the years. There is also misconfigurations that were happening because it was different times, different needs. We were all behind firewalls, closed environments, and so on. My main point here, it's no longer the same environment, and you also don't know how the environment has been changing, by whom, and for what reasons. So you find yourself in this situation where you have a critical system that have been modified multiple times by different people for different reasons, and the question that comes to mind is this is now ready for the new enterprise, for the new and modern enterprise. And unfortunately, what we're seeing is the answer in most cases is not, because we're seeing that in, I think, pretty much every one that you would be quoting will say that 9 out of 10 attacks will have a D right in the middle of it. It's a target, but outside of the fact it's a target, it's actually a sensitive target. So once you get in, as you know, you get the keys to the kingdom and so on. And that's, from my perspective, is the main reasons why companies should take a deep look into their AD environments and adjust it to the new environment that we're living in.
Oh, you make a good point about Active Directory being, well, very old. I don't think many people have a car that is 24 years old at this point. And so when you think about it from that perspective and the technology perspective, the systems and networks weren't even connected to the internet when Active Directory came out, to your point, no cloud. And these things have changed a lot. And with these misconfigurations, as you mentioned it, and then sort of vulnerabilities that have been just kind of layered over time in Active Directory, how do cyber attackers actually take advantage of those things, and what are the things you think that are maybe the solutions or the right path forward to kind of tighten that up?
That's a great question, and yes, you're absolutely right. AD has been not created with the thinking of the current state of events, but I always also remind people that it's not that AD by itself is insecure. You can tighten up and you can defend it, and it's definitely a system that can continue and serve organizations for a very long time. With that said, you do need to figure out how the attackers are abusing the environment and then act accordingly to close the gaps. That can mean scanning the AD environment and look for known vulnerabilities. That can be look for misconfigurations. There are multiple common examples of things that people just don't always think about. I'll give you a very simple one. In many companies, especially the more advanced ones, this is going to be a bit surprising. You have a dedicated team that is responsible for creating servers, setting those up. Now, as part of that, you might have the same team joining the machine to a domain, which is a very straightforward activity. Then that machine is being provided to the AD team, as an example. Now, if the AD team just provisioned the machine to become a DC at this stage, you can already guess where I'm going with it. It's going to mean that the actual account of the machine is still owned by the team that set it up from the get-go. So it's a simple example of a very thoughtful, right process to follow with a small misconfigurational step along the way. And that leads, of course, to misconfiguration. So those kind of things are the things that we're seeing a lot. Another thing that I think is a common scenario that we're seeing is companies merge, if it's through acquisition or whatever that was the scenario that happened. And very quickly you want to get to a point where you can actually have both of those new organizations operate as close to being one as possible. That means that you want them to use the same resources, have the same access policies, and so on. But unfortunately, when you acquire a company, you'll not necessarily know what is it that you're getting. And in many cases, it might be that even if you're doing an amazing job and you have hardened your environment, prepared yourself, you're ready for whatever it's coming, this new company that you acquired were not as educated as you, let's call it this way. And if you were just to absorb them in by creating an AD trust as an example, then all of a sudden you just created a beachhead that can be used by an attacker to breach a less secured environment and get to your more secured environment. So those are the kind of things that I suggest to people to think about.
So this example that you use around this acquisition, and you're bringing in something, it's almost like a mystery box that you buy, but its mystery box never really has anything good. It's not going to be a pleasant surprise for the organization, because oftentimes when they're acquiring another company, like you said, they're picking up whatever is there, whatever is available, however they've been managing things. And I really like your example of the server admins and this process. And certainly history of process, these processes were probably developed potentially in the early 2000s or even in 2010s, and things have changed quite a bit since then. And certainly when we talk about these outdated AD environments, it's great that you bring up the process, because we often think about the technology, right? This technology that is Active Directory that is 24 years old, and now we're going to cloud. How do you see these kind of risks and challenges of the outdated AD environments, not just for obviously from a technology standpoint, but what are some of the challenges around that, and where do you see that going?
That's a great question. And I think that there's definitely a lot of challenges that we're seeing in this regard, because as you start to adopt new technologies, like cloud as an example, all of a sudden you open yourself up to the wide, wild web. And that's something to consider, because all of a sudden you're no longer behind your own closed wall and so on. I think there are definitely multiple challenges, but as I mentioned, you definitely can solve all of those. So it's just a matter of putting the right processes in place. And I'm a very strong believer of people, technology, process. It's not going to be any one of those in silo. You're going to need to basically work on all of those. So I think it's, first of all, figuring out if the processes that you have, are those still relevant to what you're trying to achieve. In many cases, it might mean that maybe you have your own specialty in AD in your own team, and you can do it with them. Maybe you need to bring in a third party to look into your AD environment and figure out what do we need to change. I always also suggest to customers to start with the thinking of what is the outcome? What is it we're looking to achieve? If we have, as an example, we want to have a resiliency in our company, in our organization. Okay, what does it mean? What is the SLA time? What is the recovery point in time that you want to be able to get to? What happens in the worst case scenario? So kind of walk yourself back from the end result, and that will kind of guide you in terms of what you want to achieve. Then some of the other things that you want to think about is what kind of a compensating controls do you want to have in place if there are some additional risk that you need to bring into the organization? Because at the end of the day, we should be enabling the business. This is kind of the number one priority.
And I think that's a part that often gets forgotten about, is enabling the business. If security is always saying no, then what value does security bring to the business? You mentioned process and outdated process. The thing that always comes to mind for me, especially with ransomware being on everyone's mind, I think, is the process of Active Directory backup and recovery, or even backup and recovery in the organization at large. How do you see that evolving, or has it evolved? Have companies really taken and adjusted their process from where it was maybe 20 years ago, or are they still using the same old system and methodology? What are your thoughts around that?
So I think that the awareness around it have changed a lot, and I think that from that perspective, we definitely see companies taking these next steps. I think also in the analyst community, which is quite interesting to me to see, because I've been kind of looking at kind of as you for many, many years. I've just read yesterday one of the latest Gartner reports on ITDR, and they have the system where they rank how much impact will something have on your company. ITDR, which stands for Identity Threat Detection and Response, is now ranked as the highest priority that you can in terms of the impact that you will get, for the obvious reasons, right? Because you need the compensating control to cover your AD environment. With that said, according to Gartner, that's also interesting, only 5 to 20% of the companies out there have already adopted solutions to help them with that challenge. That means to me that there is about 80% of the companies that still are not 100% there, let's call it this way. I do see a quick adoption, and I do see a quick understanding from the company side that we're being attacked. I think to some degree, I have sometimes those conversations with CISOs, and many of them are at the current state of if we can hold the status quo, it's actually going to be fine. Now this might seem a bit surprising because they're not trying necessarily to improve things, but what kind of you need to keep in the back of your head is that the amount of attacks and the sophistication of attacks is much, much higher. So if you can keep those at bay, you're actually improving. That's another way to look at it. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So what do you see as the success, or really the direction that organizations could go in when it comes to successfully modernizing their Active Directory environment, or even in a situation where they may need to do a migration in order to consolidate some of those environments that they have out there? Because certainly, as you mentioned, when companies are acquiring all these other companies, they end up with a mess of Active Directory forests. I'm just going to quote that now and say, you have when multiple Active Directory forests, it's a mess. Kind of like a flock of birds. So
yeah.
What are your thoughts on that, Mickey?
So I think I'm going to use the same metaphor that you used. I'm going to say, don't get yourself into a position that you get a surprise box, because it's not going to be pretty. What we typically suggest is a very organized method of how to approach it. First thing, make sure that you understand what you have. Scan that environment. Before you connect anything to your environment, make sure that that environment is secured, or at least at the level that you feel comfortable enough with. So ideally, you want to scan that environment, you want to look for misconfigurations, you want to look for vulnerabilities, you want to understand maybe this environment has already been compromised. So you want to make sure that at the very least, you made sure that you're not connecting yourself to a compromised environment for the obvious reasons. Next step that you probably would want to do as part of the migration process that you're going to go through is to map out the critical and sensitive accounts in the environment from which you're bringing in the accounts. Part of the thinking is that if you were able to map out which accounts are sensitive, privileged accounts as an example, when those are being transitioned now to the new environment, they should probably go to the same, I'm going to call those OUs for the sake of the discussion, or whatever other policies you have in place, because you want to make sure that they're treated in the same way as you're treating your privileged accounts. One of the things that I've seen in some of those activities that were not necessarily the best way to approach things is transitioning everything in the same way, which leads to the fact that all of a sudden you have a privileged account that is outside of the policies of what you would typically have for those. So that's also should be part of the process. Then I will also say that if you can, avoid setting trust between environments. If you have the ability to migrate those entities, users, objects, whatever the case might be, without setting in trust, this is definitely going to be the right way to approach it. Some of the other things that we always suggest to people to think about, you're going to need some sort of a safety net, because if something goes wrong, sometimes things go wrong, what to do, right? You don't want to be in a position there is nothing you can do, so you want to be able to revert back. You probably want to test it as well. So if you can create a copy of your production environment on both sides and then test your migration plan, that's probably the ideal scenario. The next thing that you also want to think about, this one is easier to explain by an example. So back in 2012, I think, I was doing a migration project of AD. And we got to a point where we migrated a user object from environment A into forest B. The object migrates, but for some reason, out of the, let's say, 30 attributes that were populated on the original side, only 20 show up. So for some reason, we can't migrate those other 10 attributes, and we go crazy trying to understand why those 10 specifically are not migrating. Long story short, after a few days, we realized that the problem was not the migration. It was migrating. There was a policy on the other side that was taking those attributes and clearing those. But we spend a lot of time trying to understand what is causing it. My point there is that you want to have visibility into how your migration process looks like and what's happening actually in reality. So you want something that can say on both sides, is this object being modified by something? If yes, by what? Because that can answer the question of why. So to summarize it all, you want to have vulnerability scanning and understanding of the potential vulnerabilities that you might be exposing your organization to, and ideally you want to fix those ahead of time. You want to have a safety net, so if something goes wrong, you have the ability to bounce back. You want to test your migration in a production-like environment as close as possible, ideally the exact production. And you want to have as much visibility as possible into what is actually happening during the migration process.
No, that's great. Thank you very much, Mickey. I really appreciate you spending some time with me today. So this is Sean Metcalf with Security Weekly. Please visit securityweekly.com/SemperisBH to learn more about Semperis. Apologies, Mickey. And we will be back with more interviews. Thank you very much for joining us.
Good morning. This is Mandy with Pulse Security Weekly, joining you from Las Vegas. And today we are very happy to welcome Matthias Valentin from Tenzier. Matthias, welcome.
Thanks. Great to be on the show.
So glad you're here. Have you had a successful Black Hat experience so far?
So far, yeah, it's been pretty smooth, surprisingly. Great event,
Awesome.
Very big this year. It's exciting.
Fantastic. Well, I know that you're here releasing a new product. You're launching a new tool, and that is what I'd really like to find out about. So, do you want to give a real quick summary?
Yeah, so basically the elevator pitch is Tenzier. We are bringing open source security data pipelines to market. And I'm happy to tell you more about that later, what that actually means. But you can think of it as a mechanism to acquire, enrich, route security data, get it from A to B, and that's a primitive that's very important to accomplish things like building a security data lake and implementing a scalable detection and response architecture. So it's really a building block of what we also call the modern security data stack.
And from what I've reviewed, your platform is very customizable. But going into that, like, what now drives such heavy use of data in cybersecurity operations?
So I think this is evolutionary across a lot of verticals. More and more digitization drives more and more data producers. The amount of data we at the other end then consume is just exponentially skyrocketing since years. This is unchanging. The tools we have built a decade ago, and in the past, a lot of the processing and the analytics happened in the SIM. They have not been built for this data volume. They're basically collapsing under the load.
Yeah.
It's not economically feasible to build everything on top of the older tools, and so people are struggling with the sheer volume at the moment to accomplish meaningful things. And along with that, the threat landscape is evolving. Attackers get smarter, more access to more data. So there's always, we have to be smarter in our detections to find them, and that requires more data. So that's, I think, one of the, these are two in combination are the main drivers for the need to process more data.
Absolutely. And being able to use more data, and really, like what I'm hearing and what you're saying is trying to help people understand that the current architecture and the current way the infrastructure was done for cybersecurity operations will never catch up.
This is difficult. Yes, these legacy technologies, they're not built simply. They have been built for different use case for small amounts of data, and that's why we see people shifting basically their attention to more and more heavy-duty data tools. But that requires a lot of skills to customize this for the security workloads. So we always have this dichotomy between the data world, which they have a lot of horsepower in their tooling, but they lack the security-specific use cases, the ability to solve these problems that security has. And that transition from data to security, that requires a lot of data engineering. And that is not a skill that a lot of organizations have that come from a perspective where they need to solve security problems.
And so would you say then that that is the greatest challenge facing security teams currently?
Yes, security teams don't have data engineers like by default. That's usually a different skill, and so it's finding these data engineers that also understand security is even a rarer breed. So there's really a lack there because the current tools don't work very well, and building your own is something that's quite costs intensive. So there's really a gap right now in the market, and that's why we see a lot of people coming up with custom in-house solutions again. And so that's kind of that eye of the storm is right where we focus with our approach.
And does that go into, or will you explain a little bit more about SecDevOps?
So I think you mean SecDataOps.
SecDataOps, yes,
Yes, SecDataOps is really an operating model. And I think that it's important to understand that this is not a market segment or something as new trying to kind of place itself next to well-established categories of tools, but it's rather a way to think about leveraging the data to build out security use cases from a data flow perspective, thinking of how do you get something done, for example, like implementing live threat detection with your own security content, and as a first level, and then the next level also taking that security content to apply it retroactively. And these like a very standard use case when you build out a part of a large enterprise SOC or an MSSP or an MDR. And if you start thinking from a data flow perspective, what data do I need to accomplish this, and where does the visibility data arrive, or how does it need to be processed, reshaped in order to get to the next steps that I can apply my own security content to it, my threat intelligence, my IOCs, my observables, whatever I have, my Sigma rules, maybe more elaborate contents, potentially even ML models, anything that for me, I use the term security content to summarize everything that I can deploy on the visibility event data that in the traditional world would just end up in the SIM. And that's not right now, that's not where you can build advanced workflows. So there's basically SecDataOps is a way to think about this data as a pipeline, different individual steps from data acquisition, going from there to the next step, enriching, aggregating it, bringing it down, deduplicating it, maybe applying an event taxonomy like OCSF so that you can standardize downstream detection analytics from the data collection. So in the part that was something that SIM owned, both the data acquisition and the analytics. And so I think that dependency is pretty strong, and security teams right now are looking to decouple this, to make it more modular, reusable, and that is something when you start looking at the data flows, that's where you can draw these lines and in the middle of the individual sequences in the data flow, and that then applying event taxonomy, like ECS is pretty common, like OCSF, and there's ASIM, there's dozens, I think, out there. And that's just one of many steps. Then the next step would be finding, when you have a custom tool, let's say you want to deploy a machine learning model, then, well, it needs to have the data in a certain way so that you can bring it there. So,
but if I may, in what you're explaining and the usefulness for the security teams, it sounds as though you're saying with the inundation of data that must be wrangled in order to have a successful threat hunting team and campaign, that what Tenzier is focusing on is not just a technology problem. Because part of what I'm hearing in the Sec DataOps and bringing in the data engineering side, that you're trying to boost the people who are tasked with aggregating all the data, storing it, using it correctly. You're helping bring them into a developer, like more of a developer mindset, even if that's not what they came from.
yes, I think that's really where the skills gap is. Security people are not data engineers. And security, they have the right ideas, like I want my data to be in this shape. But then executing on that is usually, that's when, when it's not the case, the data's not yet there, and that's rough, because then they have to start coding, start developing, and that's a very different skill set. We want the analysts to stay in their ability to think about the threats, express dependencies there from a data perspective at high level, and quickly make these adjustments to the data as they need. And so that's really this, some call it midstream part in the data stack, that glue that holds it together. When you have actually the data, you have the analytic, and you just want to make the two work together. So that basically operationalization of your detection is a big challenge, and that's what we solve with this Sec DataOps principle, by reducing the friction there.
Well, and it seems like not only reducing the friction, but also reducing the costs that are involved.
Ultimately, I think the ability to have processing outside of the SIM is a huge opportunity to save costs. Like there's especially the volume-based pricing that still dominates. We have opportunity to bring out workloads from the SIM and move them closer to the source, move them midstream. One example would be indicator matching. That's something. The data you have in the SIM might actually just be a subset, first of all, because of cost reasons, but you may want to apply your IOC matching on the full scope. So there's not just a benefit in terms of cost savings, but you also get more breadth when you can run your IOCs on all types of events, security events. And so that's a very it's a simple use case, because it's just, say, a very dumb operation. It's just a lookup of a piece of data. It's not complex as a neural network or something.
But it's so composable. It's so, from what I have reviewed, it is very customizable. So it is very, for the security practitioner that recognizes they don't have the data engineering background inside, being able to take it and apply it with a very similar structure to using pipes in Linux, or using, having that plug and play availability as Sec DataOps is bringing up. I feel like that's also empowering the security practitioners much more quickly and in a much more agile way.
Right, I think so.
Like
we haven't
future-proofing
you just
a little bit more.
mentioned the magic word, pipelines. I think that is really the way we express Sec DataOps. So for us, those security data pipelines are the vehicle to implement your use cases. And as you said, it's a very modular approach. Like a pipeline consists of a set of operators. Between operators flows the data. And if I can just take a module out there, like, for example, threat intelligence matching as one operator of the pipeline, it's like, quickly taking the things you want and being done. And there's not a lot of development or headbanging involved to get your data into the right shape. It's just there. It's a set of building blocks, and you can build larger use cases out of that. So that's our abstraction that we find fits very well, and security people understand it very well.
absolutely. And in about 30 seconds, could you summarize about nodes in the data fabric?
Yeah, well, that's now you're fast forwarding basically. How do you deploy Tenzier? Tenzier.
Which we want to know.
Yes, that makes a lot of sense. So basically, in a Tenzier architecture, you deploy nodes. The nodes are hosts for pipelines, and you can span pipelines between nodes to create a data fabric. That's the essence.
Awesome. And the nodes being so flexible, I mean, that's just beautiful in my eyes. It is beautiful. Even I highly suggest reviewing the website and the blog posts. To anyone out there who is listening and considering using this tool, I definitely recommend the documents and everything that was on the website. So, real quick, will you recap for us? You're here launching a new product. What is it and who is it for?
Right. So we're launching Tenzier as our product.
Okay.
It's security data pipelines. We are open source company that sets us apart.
Yes.
It is really for anybody who has a large SOC, builds an MDR, has an MSSP, wants to get security data from A to B, quickly operationalize it, get useful value out of it, ultimately, and then save costs on their existing tooling, get the SIM costs under control. There's a lot of workloads you can get out there. And so that's, in a nutshell, where we're trying to enter into the market.
Fantastic, and a lot of great information for the decision makers. And I really like the idea of being able to future-proof security operations as data aggregation and every part of it continues to be a day in and day out consideration for security operations. Thank you, Matthias, for joining us very much.
Pleasure to have that conversation with you. Thank you.
Thank you. And on behalf of Pulse Security Weekly and Security Weekly here in Las Vegas, I'm Mandy. Thank you.